the Aspen Center for Physics was incorporated in 1968 as a Colorado nonprofit corporation. And as a corporation, it has to have members and trustees. Well, if you use normal corporate language, the members would be the stockholders and the trustees would be the directors. So you have a board of directors and a set of stockholders. When it was first set up in 1968, we had a very distinguished set of people on it, and the directors and the stockholders were set up as identical. So when you hear people talking about the members or trustees at the Physics Center, they were originally the same people. And that ultimately caused us a bunch of problems, which I'll say a little bit about in a few minutes. But the Physics Center early on was very informal. Every year we would have 2 trustees meetings, well, really just one initially, timed to be at the same time as the trustees meeting for the Aspen Institute, because Robert O. Anderson, who was chairman of the Aspen Institute, was one of the members of our board. So we would sit around and discuss the status of the Physics Center, and we got several lectures from R.O. on use of trickle irrigation on his Australian ranch and other interesting things like that. But we did get our business done. But it was all very informal. Then we began to have some problems in getting new people involved, because the corporation was originally set up with 16 members, 16 trustees, and as I said, it was a very distinguished list. It included, for example, Fred Seitz, who was head of the National Academy of Sciences, and Hans Bethe, who could come occasionally but not very often, and a number of other very eminent physicists who were around every few years. But that meant that we were going to have problems getting young people involved unless we made some changes. So we had to keep amending our bylaws to increase the number of trustees. Then the problem arose that the trustees and the members were identical, and so there was no set term for the members, and everything was rather casual. So I have some letters in my files from when I was president, writing to people asking members, would you please resign as a member so we can add some younger person? Well, we gradually increased the number of trustees and members up to 23, and that was sort of the limit, the way things were set up. But we had this problem, as I already mentioned, of getting younger people involved, simply because we didn't have the spots to put them on. And yet, for the institution to really be vital in physics, you had to have a flow of new people coming through, new people and new ideas. So ultimately, 1989, as I recall, it was either Paul Fishbane or Mike Turner, whose presidencies overlapped then, appointed a committee to look at revising the bylaws. And Mike Simmons and I were the principals on that. We went to our lawyer and had long conversations about what we could and could not do. And I got a copy of the Colorado nonprofit law. And when it was revised some years later, I got a big, thick copy. I've read that thing so many times. I know what's going on with the the nonprofit corporation law. Anyway, Nick gave us advice, and we tried to decide what we wanted to do. And then went through I went through 6 drafts with Nick on the new bylaws. And the result was a reincorporation and a new set of bylaws in which we did something which is very sensible. You'd say, a normal corporation, the stockholders are not the same as the board of directors. So we separated them. So the members became separate, and we could have up to 80 members, which gave us the flexibility we needed. And the trustees then were elected by the members, just as stockholders elect a board of directors. And the trustees appointed the officers, and so we went on to a normal corporate basis. A lot of people still don't understand quite how this works because they don't have this translation that members equal stockholders, et cetera. So that has worked pretty well because we've had quite a few new people coming in. At that time, there were some changes in the trustees. In 1980, I negotiated a deal with some of the people who'd been around for a while, namely Murray Gelman, who was here, and David Pines, and Peter Kaus. And the four of us agreed that we would go off of the board to make room for new people. And we became honorary trustees at that point. Honorary means we can go to meetings, but we can't vote. And we can exert our influence, hopefully good influence in the background. We went back on the membership, not the trustees, in 1990 when things were revised. And then since then, it's worked very well. We've had lots of experience, and we've gone through considerable evolution because we had to try out how the new system would work. And last year, 2004, we revised the bylaws yet again and took care of some of the glitches which had been in there. And hopefully now we have something which will work for a long time. Now, this is all part of the evolution of the center, because in the early days when it was small and as a group of people who knew each other well and had been around a long time, you could settle things very informally. But as an institution matures, you've got to have some kind of operating procedures and rules, and that's what we've got in place. You don't want people making the same mistakes every year. We have the same mistaken discussions every year, but with the rules in place, we try not to actually do things which we've learned from experience are going to cause problems. So that's sort of the evolution of the legal history of the center. It's all, the emphasis now is trying to get a steady turnover so young physicists can come in, get involved early on, and go through a couple of 5-year terms as members. Perhaps if they're interested in really getting into operations, they become officers and continue on longer. And then the bulk of the trustees are actually elected by the members, so they really represent the membership. Now, people who are visiting the center, just participating, hear members, they tend not to know what that is. There's, in the past, more so than now, there was this notion, well, if you're a member, somehow you're in a privileged position. And maybe you're getting special considerations. You get special considerations, all right, you get to work. you get to do the things that need to be done. So that's the way it's gone. At the present time, we have about 78 members and roughly 15 trustees running the center, and half a dozen officers who are actually doing the work. And of course, we have a good staff now, so that the business of carrying out the trash and so on is no longer a responsibility of membership.